Bryan Johnson talks about an algorithm that takes better care of you and your health than you could yourself. Part of it is nutrition. Now, I ask myself the question, how can I implement something like this without Bryan Johnson's blueprint being a product? Now, of course, he is selling food powder now, but I already have, again, explored food powder for myself again. Now, I also figured, what if I could already implement basically algorithmic nutrition in food powder form? And this is what I now have tested. I got my blood work done last December, that's now 3 months ago, at my doctor's office, and then uploaded it to a company called Inside Tracker, and this company interprets my results. It also takes into account potentially your DNA. If you upload your DNA and you do a DNA test, it also takes into account your sleep data from Garmin, for example, but it probably won't change your food recommendations and the general recommendations that result out of this based on your last night's sleep. Because, I mean, if the interval of blood draws, blood draws are invasive, they are quite expensive. This last blood draw I did cost me 60 euros, but I selected only a few parameters. If you do all of the 48 parameters that it currently allows to upload, then it would be 48, and it would cost me, I think, 250 or 260 euros even with one blood draw. Now, if you think about hunger, for example, then hunger is an algorithm that takes into account even the workout I did this morning. Therefore, it requires, or it demands, a few more carbs. And I meshed up both words. I wanted to say to remand or something like this. Now, if you increase the frequency, then of course this makes more sense, because then these recommendations are also in shorter term. The question is also how individualized the recommendations are, but since they are already kind of individualized, and that's kind of just the best approach. I mean, if you wanted to build an algorithm that takes kind of care of your nutrition, then Inside Tracker is the thing that seems to come seemingly pretty close at this point in time. Not pretty close, but it is the closest it could be. Not it could be, but it is the closest that it is, basically. I mean, there might be levels ahead. There might be something where you can just take a food shaker and then put it onto a station, and the station would basically take in protein powder, take in something else, take in vegetable powder, because you have to get in your vegetables, and then put it into a liquid form that then, based on how much you want to eat, or need to eat rather, and also including benefits of fasting and so on and so forth, how much you need at this point in time, and would put it into a form like this. Now, I asked myself the question, can I already implement something like this? And therefore, I first of all tried these different meal shakes again. I tried Huel again. I also already tried it 1.5 years ago. I still seem to have digestive issues, but I also did not eat as much Huel, so much Huel that maybe my gut biome would have adapted, so I don't really know if this is for me. I also took a look at other meal shakes again, as I already did 1.5 years ago, as I first tested all of this, and I then went into making my own meal shakes, into stirring them up, into mixing them, I made protein eggs and I put them in glasses, and I had like 40 of these in my fridge just for the whole month. And then I changed it up a little bit and so on and so forth. And then I began to eat meat again after 6.5 years of being a vegetarian. Now, what I'm trying to say is that nutrition is a lot. And it can only become more complicated. Now, maybe there is somebody who simplifies all of this, but if there is more data and science that is coming out, again, that is coming out in terms of nutrition, in terms of what is beneficial, then it might become more and more complex. Because then, if there are more and more papers, you have to theoretically read all of these papers and then make these decisions. And then what you actually need is kind of an ingredient list. So Inside Tracker actually now gives me a few recommendations. It gets a few different data points. It also asks me what my goal is. My goal in the past was strength. To improve my strength and power is actually the goal called, but now I have it set to inner age, because I just copied this mostly from Bryan Johnson, who put out the philosophy to not die as kind of the primary goal maybe civilization should have, so simply not die, because of a few different things like technology advancing and maybe a potential better future. And therefore you might want to be around for this. But if I take, for example, my life expectancy, and then I also take into account other factors, then I might only live like a few decades. And I might not see this innovation, and therefore the idea is to just stay around. So of course I'm just copying this, and this is also kind of just the main goal of this approach here. I'm just copying what Bryan Johnson is doing, and it's not that I don't care if I'm just a copycat, but it seems to be somewhat reasonable to try to copy all of these things, and probably I cannot copy them anyway. And I also probably will take into account all of the testing I have done over the last years, and therefore, well, let's continue. In the Insight Tracker, you have your home, and then you can track your habits. You can also see your deep sleep, and this is, in my case, from Garmin, so Garmin tracks my sleep. It does not connect to other platforms, only to Apple Health and Garmin. And then I also have my goal, which in this case is my inner age, reduce my inner age. And then I have a few different habits I can basically track. These are nutritional or habitual, I think is the proper word. Now, some of these are tracked automatically. Mixing up my aerobic routine tracks, for example, how much cardio I did on Garmin. Then I also have progress your resistance training, and it checks off, I think, when I actually am or have been doing at least 30 minutes of resistance training on a given day. Then it gives me a green check mark. Now, if we go into my results, then we can see the different things it shows you actually. So you have the optimized things that are green, and this was very helpful. I actually had kind of a somewhat of an issue, and I did not know how to interpret this data. And if you have the normal ranges, then these normal ranges of a blood parameter apply to everybody, which could be an 85-year-old or an 18-year-old, but probably they have different optimized zones for, let's say, testosterone or other markers, which I don't know how to interpret as well. And so basically, this is just, okay, we have these set boundaries, and now we display these set boundaries and make this thing green here. And this is just so helpful, because just calcium. Okay, then this is calcium. What optimized calcium means for you. And these are all the different things I put in. I also made quite a project out of getting all of my different blood draws from my past and putting all of these in there. This means that sometimes I have like multiple data points, and in total I cannot see all of the results in here, I think. Show history. It doesn't show all of the results, but in terms of a few markers, you can see that I have, I think, like 8 or 9 data points, which is fairly nice, I would say. Let's take a look, for example, at CRP. My CRP was apparently measured multiple times throughout multiple times of my history, and it was always in the green. Now, it gets your blood on the one side, it also gets your activity and your sleep, and it then shows resting heart rate. So in terms of longevity predictor, the first one would probably be VO2 max. The second most important one, which you could also measure or at least get an estimate of. So VO2 max you can only kind of get an estimate of if you don't go into a lab and do a proper VO2 max running test on the bike or on the treadmill. And resting heart rate is something that is actually kind of measured because your watch can measure heart rate. The other one is just an estimate, in this case from Garmin. It also shows you other things like how much REM sleep you had and whether this is optimized. Previously to this, of course, sometimes it says in Samsung Health that this is optimized, or this is what the normal range would be. But I don't want to opt for normal. I want to basically be optimal. And of course, maybe there is even a more optimal zone, be in the top 1% in terms of VO2 max, for example. Currently, I'm in the top 5%, and I have worked very hard, at least in my eyes, for now months and months. And I also began basically planning my training at age 12. I don't know whether my VO2 max was ever higher compared to now, because I don't have data on this, which again speaks to maybe recording this and beginning with something like this now, because I'm now in a somewhat healthy state, and if I get my blood markers now, then I at least have something to compare to. Another thing I've actually at least followed a little bit is maybe if I take part in a study, I can actually get my brain scanned, but this would be something else, and this would be fairly interesting to see my brain in let's say at least close to a very good condition compared to me being 85 years old and barely being able to speak. Now, it also gives me out my inner age then, and it says that it is time for a change because I'm biologically way older than I am chronologically, which in this case is very bad, because ideally you would be biologically younger than you would be chronologically. Then it gives out an action plan, and this action plan now is this year. It's recommendations. It's exercise, supplements, and food recommendations, and also lifestyle recommendations, which are the ones with the flower. Now you can get some of these automatically tracked. The other ones you have to basically read a little bit through, and then you have to decide on what you actually want to follow out of this. Now this is, so, for example, fairly straightforward. It says 2 tablespoons of olive oil, not but teaspoons of olive oil. Now what I did here is I got basically all of these recommendations that were kind of in a powdered form or liquid form. Then in a given day I say, okay, I already make my food shake. There is also the recommendation in there. So I can actually list the recommendations that have been in there, and then also what I did in regards to these, because these are not that specific. Eat probiotic food today. I eat 3 forks of sauerkraut in a given day. Diversify your protein sources with plants, and it also shows you this impact score. And this impact score is probably how much impact it has. The maximum score is 10. Then you already see that the aerobic routine has a maximum impact, and also the resistance training has an impact, but only a 6.0. So if I, instead of doing resistance training, just eat olive oil, then this has a more impact on rejuvenating myself, or not rejuvenating, but just slowing down my speed of aging, compared to resistance training, at least according to this data. But maybe also because it doesn't measure how much I am able to lift. And if I would then compare myself against people in different age groups, in terms of how much I am able to lift, then, and it would include this data, then it would maybe also account for this. And maybe it would give me a higher score for resistance training, I don't know. It also says try out different types of dairies, or different type of dairy. But what it actually is it says 2 servings of dairy, which I have in here, which are about 400 or 300 grams of curd. Previously it was 500, but now I reduced it because otherwise the additional powder would not fit into the shaker. The shaker I'm actually then using is another shaker, and this other shaker is here in the back. And this other shaker looks like this. This is the actual shaker I am using. I just got this one for free, and so I'm using it for home. Now, I put all of these different recommendations in there. So enjoy more dark chocolate, or enjoy some dark chocolate. It also has the alternative to have just 1 tablespoon of cacao powder, which is also in here. Now, of course, I already drank parts of it and I refilled a little bit with milk, because otherwise it would not get the powder out, because for the purpose of, I had already mixed this shake previously, and today I did for the first time this shake with algorithmic portions, you could say. Then also add garlic to your routine is also something it recommends, and I put in 1 gram of garlic. Eat ground flaxseed daily, and it says 4 tablespoons, which I also have put in here. I happen to have already ground flaxseed in here. Why? Because I already, from the previous meal shakes and also from trying these meal shakes again, I did buy a few of these ingredients that seem to be good levers. For example, flaxseed can lever your fat up a little bit. Then you have protein powder. Then you have maybe greens, for example. And I don't have greens in here because it is not in the recommendations. So the idea is that this is just the recommendation shake, basically. Apart from maybe, I could also have taken a different type of dairy, but it is a type of dairy that is allowed in here in this habit. So it still is kind of a shake that is provided to me by the algorithmic interpretation of all of this data by Inside Tracker. And so at the end of the day, I did not put the olive oil in here because, and maybe I should also, there is also an additional habit. So these are only the habits or behavioral changes or recommendations that I did select, because there are also a few more, and these few more are things I could do. I did not include the supplements that were in a capsule form, because I would take these in a capsule form, because that seems to be a little bit quicker. Because for turmeric, for example, if you take turmeric in a non-capsule form, in a powder form, then you have to taste it. And I don't want to taste turmeric too much, so I have it just in a capsule form. I basically have supplements that I manage myself, and then I have the supplements which are recommended by me based on my blood results and all of this other data you can potentially put in. You could even upload your DNA data. And then, well, that's it. That's a shake. And this is kind of a first proof of concept, I would see this as. I don't know how long I will continue this, but I also don't know when my next blood draw will be. Probably in December. At least that's what's scheduled. That is what is scheduled. It would then cost me either again 50 or 60 euros, plus what Inside Tracker costs for a year, plus the inside age calculation. And maybe ideally, you would get your blood drawn quarterly. Sherwin Shares, for example, is a internet, or is a YouTuber who also talks about health tech and so on and so forth. And apparently he, at least as seen in one of his videos, got his blood drawn every single month for multiple years at this point in time, for maybe all of the markers. So in terms of cost, this would amount to quite a lot, but this would also be something that is just very, very useful, especially if you then are 85 years old and you are trying to restore some of your levels, like your vitamin D level. Was it always this low, or is it just now this low because you had this accident 2 years ago and you don't know? So, well, recording this data now seems to kind of make sense, as long as I, or Sherwin Shares, is in a very good health, but my health seems to already be kind of declining. And that's kind of a first proof of concept. Bryan Johnson already tries a few of these things, but the algorithm Bryan Johnson talks about seems to, at least at this point in time, mostly not exist. It's probably him, it's probably Dr. Solman, it's probably maybe a few other things, it's probably the study, and I read, and then he reads up on the study, and then he talks about it with Dr. Solman, and then they make up a plan. But it's not an algorithm as in an Excel spreadsheet that puts out all the things he needs to do in a given day. It's not a program that is a web platform and an app, and you input what you eat, and then it outputs, okay, you need to eat less of that, or something like this. But Inside Tracker is already something that exists. It gets... Of course, there are other platforms too that might do something similar. I just haven't found them. There is also a company called Heads Up Health, which also allows to integrate multiple sources. Also, I recently heard about an app called N of One, which would also connect to Garmin and to a few other companies or platforms, and would then also try, and what you basically could do in there is you could track correlations, similar to App Bearable, which I also have tried in the last few weeks. And the main problem seems to be that there is no objective data, which it could get from Google Fit. So I track via Samsung Health. Samsung Health can be synced to Google Fit via Health Platform or Health Sync, which is an app that connects both of these services. And then you could potentially get data in there and then have the objective results and then get your input. What did you do? Did you go to sleep earlier? Of course, the sleep is tracked, but maybe your bedtime is not tracked. You could say, okay, I went to bed on this time. You can also say I left the window open, so it was a little bit cooler, but it might have been a little bit noisier. How did this impact my sleep quality? This is something you cannot do in Garmin. This is something you cannot do in Samsung Health. This is something you cannot do anywhere else. And also not in this app, because at least as of currently, even though there have been previews online, I cannot do anything in that, apart from tracking one experiment, which I am taking part in or not. I just got the invite code and therefore am in the app. In summary, this is something I already can do right now. I can already get a pre-prepared powdered milkshakes. I can already use my own intelligence to make up my nutrition, to test things, and then to see, even though I cannot make data correlations, and it would be very resourceful to do so, I can write down things, and then with my own intelligence and kind of whatever I am doing in my mind, can come up with different things and test them and try to improve. Of course, I might steer off into a tangent, but this seems to at least have worked a little bit so far. What I also can do is rely on additional feedback loops, and that I then would kind of just copy paste. And this is one of the first feedback loops of this kind, I would say. It is, of course, I'm also taking Garmin fitness data, and then I'm trying to improve. For example, I took a look at my heart rate today as I airbiked today in the gym, and it was not very high, and I did these 1 minute intervals, and probably 1 minute intervals are just not elevating heart rate too much, so I was mostly in zone 3, which was not that nice, because I, in the same thing, was also already in zone 4 or zone 5. What I'm trying to say here is that with your own intelligence, you can obviously also make choices that are probably improving. One could also think of the rational agent of oneself as kind of a never-ending improvement algorithm. Why is hedonic adaptation here and there? Maybe because once you get what you want, you need to still improve. And so you just take away the things, and then you can focus on the thing that is new. So it seems to be very useful, because otherwise you would have to calculate how much should I increase my goal. But if it it would get very complicated really quick. That's what I'm trying to say. So this is kind of the first implementation of an external feedback loop that is not based on me, but it is outsourced intelligence. And Inside Tracker scaffers through all of these papers and then puts together, based on also my VO2 max, based on my resting heart rate, a recommendation. But this recommendation seems to be based mostly on the blood results, which in this case are updating with a frequency of, in this case, of a frequency of 1 year, which might be a little bit too large of a time interval. So maybe getting it closer and closer, and maybe also measuring these things non-invasively in the future, would allow for shorter and shorter feedback loops and allow to approximate something external like this, objective data, to get close to something like hunger that seems to be kind of influenced or negatively impacted by the availability of other intelligences that then are trying to manipulate hunger into getting you to subscribe to anything, or getting you to subscribe to buying chocolate at the grocery store again and again and again. And so therefore the marginal increase in terms of utility for the other person that then tries to marginally increase their profit by marginally increasing sugar in bread, by marginally increasing fat in waffles, and so on and so forth, might lead to a vector that is kind of different from the vector you are trying to go. And this vector would point towards longevity.